Hello everybody, my name is Rextus.
And I'm Soulkale.
And welcome back to Warframe. So, vote how to. First, we show where the Warframe's at. So, Volt drops off of the dojo. If you want to, you can go through the dojo and go through the Tenno Research Lab. Tenno Research Lab is a room that you can build within the dojo. You just have to wait 12 hours though to be able to build the frame. It takes quite a bit of research time, 3 full days exactly, to wait for the frame to actually get fully researched so you can be able to build them. That's one way that you can get them. The second opportune way to get them is by going to any relay if you can find Teshin within those relays. Teshin sells Volt, Excalibur, and Mag, the 3 starting Warframes, at 60,000 Conclave standing. So you can also get Volt that way. It's kind of a unique one. I don't know really why they have it in the dojo or Pluto. You would think that maybe it might drop throughout the rest of the environment, but that is a unique way of getting Volt. Not too thrilled about that one because I feel like there should be some unique way to be able to get Volt, but that is what it is.
Yeah.
Well, shall we go through the abilities?
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Oh, hi.
You got creepy?
I got creepy.
Oh boy. Yep. I just keep on rolling with it because those guys, they just keep on pulling up and it's just random when he occurs, the man in the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, passive. Grounded movement only, so you have to be in touch, in contact with the ground. Generates an electrical charge building up to 10 damage per meter that is unleashed within the next attack. So for this, it actually has a cap for the damage cap, and that's at 1,000 damage. So that means that you have to travel per meter 10, right? Per meter you get 10 damage. So you need to travel 100 meters to be able to unleash that damage, to get all that damage up to its cap. Now this is kind of ridiculous because this is like you have to travel 3 full tiles or even 2 full tiles to be able to get the rest of that damage, to get up to the cap of that damage. And even with 1,000 damage, it depends on the weapon, but like really 1,000 damage isn't that useful if it takes you that long to be able to build it up just via moving. So that doesn't make a whole lot of potential there for just the passive. It does though buff off of critical damage. So if you do have anything that crits, when you crit with your weapon, it'll basically boost that damage off of that. Also, you got to take into account that it does not apply to multi-shot. So it is only a once per instance. You can only have it on one projectile or one ability or one instance of that damage getting multiplied, or adding that 1,000 damage on and then getting multiplied there again with critical after that. Whether you have a weapon with critical or if it's just your ability, it can't get procced multiple times. You build it up, it's there, you pop it, it's gone, and then you have to build it back up again. So this is just kind of annoying to that point, because if you don't have anything that can readily get the discharge off quicker, you have to end up going that 100 meters, walking 100 meters just to get the passive up to its cap. So that's just kind of meh, it's not that great. Shock. Launch a voltic projectile that stuns and damages its target. A chain of electricity extends from that target to shock and stun nearby enemies. Drain is 15 energy. That's a very cheap cast. That's 10 energy below the common cast. Chain links. This is how many chains it will actually go from that target to the next target. So you can actually effectively hit 6 targets going from the initial one, and it'll chain 5 additional targets beyond that first target. So this is very useful just to stun lock a whole group of enemies. It just completely takes out their damage because they can't do anything while they're getting stunned. Damage is 200 flat on a base, and the range, there's 2 different ranges here. The casting range is actually infinite. You can cast it from any target distance, and the actual range here is the chain links range. So how the distance from one target to the next, how far apart those targets can be and they'll still get zapped from each other, is a 15-meter range. So if you zap one target, the next target can only be 15 meters, beyond 15 meters, it won't change to that next target. So they have to be in a group, they have to be grouped up, but even 15 meters is a super huge range. You're going to be able to hit all 6 units with this. So this is pretty useful. So with that, speed is embody the current electric current. Volt and his allies receive a brief movement speed and a reload speed buff. Drain is 25 energy. Radius for like Chroma, the contribution range, the gifting range is 25 meters to give it to allies. Duration is 12 seconds for the ability. Speed multiplier is based upon movement speed and your weapon speed. So if you have a melee weapon or anything that has a fire rate, I believe fire rate might be considered here too, but for melee definitely, and for your base movement speed, it's increased by 75%, multiplied through by 1.75. I believe the math is a little bit different there instead of just going from a static 75%. Reload speed is a 25% reload speed increase. This makes sure that you can just reload faster, get your weapon reloaded, and be able to keep on firing. And for this one, there's 2 interesting things to note here. With Limbo, if you've ever played Limbo, you know about his troll. He likes to troll you, and he likes to get you into his limbo, and oh man, that's so annoying.
Yeah.
And you have to roll out of it. Same thing here with Volt, which is actually interesting, is you can actually backflip out of it. You can right click, press backwards, and then basically press the same button that you would for roll, and you'll do a back spring, a backflip. And this will actually disable and decast speed off of you if you just don't want the speed. Now, speed is pretty useful because with speed having at least a 2 times speed multiplier, speed buffer, or even higher, you can be able to traverse maps very, very quickly, be able to go through the maps, especially if you're trying to speed run. Pretty much with Volt, this is very possible for the entire team. At some point though, you kind of go, hey, you know, at 3 times multiplier or even higher, that's the point where I'm running into walls. I'm just bapping into every single object. I cannot control that speed. Yeah. And at that point, that might be to the point where you might want to decast it because the speed is just too much and you start just landing onto every object and it's just very annoying. So there is that. I do consider a speed at least of 2 to be sufficient for this ability, but kind of going beyond that, not really necessary, but it is pretty nice. And as soon as you hit 3 and going even higher than that, that's when you start to notice, like, I'm really running into walls. I'm really running into objects. This is really something that I can't control, especially with base movement speed. So at some point, the speed from this gets to be a little bit too much. Not too much, but it does become more noticeable as you increase the power strength for this ability, getting the speed beyond just 3 or around 3. Again, this too with hands, you don't actually have to have any hands to cast this ability, so you can reload with 2 hands or do anything else with 2 hands, and you're able to reload. And this is pretty useful, especially speed running again. Electric shield. Volt deploys an electric shield that blocks projectiles. Drain is 50 energy. Duration is 25 seconds for the ability. The extra damage when you're firing or if you're meleeing through the shield, I think it's only toward projectiles though, is 50% added bonus damage of electricity going through with your projectiles. The interesting to note here is that something that they didn't put into the ability is if you have anything that deals critical damage going through that shield, your critical damage will not just be adding 200% critical damage, it will be multiplied 200% critical damage, meaning that anything that deals critical damage is now doubled going through this ability. Super huge, especially when you're dealing with eidolons or anything else like that. Literally, if you're doing, 50k grand damage with a critical hit, now you're going from 50k all the way to 100k. So this is super useful, especially versus eidolons or something that's super tanky, that, hey, I need to take this thing out. This thing is really annoying, or it's just, I need more damage. This adds a huge amount of critical damage.
Oh, yeah.
So again, it's not times, It's not adding a static 200% critical damage. It's multiplying your cumulative, your altogether critical multiplier, and multiplying it by 2. So if you have a 5 times critical damage multiplier, that's 10 times critical damage multiplier. If you have 2.5 times, or the basic 2 critical, it'll go from 2 to 4 or 2.5 to 5. So that's super useful. With the shields, you do have a limit, just the same thing as Frost's snow globe. You can only put down 4 Frost snow globes. You can only put down 6 shields here on a limit. And with the shield in and of itself, it doesn't state the ranges of the actual ability, but the shield's width on the ground, as if you just cast the ability, is 6 meters by 4.25 tall. And then if you pick up the shield goes from width of 6 meters down to width of 2 meters. And then the height actually retains some of that height. So it goes from 4.25 to 3 meters. So still pretty good range on the shield. It just goes from a vertical shield to from a horizontal shield to a vertical shield. So not too much difference there, but just really useful, especially for the critical damage, mainly for Eidolons, for just dealing straight up critical damage. So yes, discharge. Volt discharges the electricity that courses through him. The shockwave paralyzes and damages nearby enemies. Enemies on the edge of the shockwave are stunned. Drain is 100 energy. Radius is 20 meters of the initial radius of the ability. Effect radius is 8 meters. Now this is interesting. What's the difference between the radius and the effect radius? Radius is the initial area that you hit with discharge, so the immediate area that's around you. When you're talking about the effect radius, that's basically the same thing as a shock with the chain links. The distance between one target to the next target for it to actually chain and continue going. So this actually is pretty much, if you think about it, a global range, because this will actually keep on linking and going further and further. As long as there is an enemy to latch onto, it will keep on linking further and further away, latching onto almost pretty much all enemies. So that's the linking effect, right? So the effect radius, or the base radius, is 20 meters. Then it can link from there another 8 meters to the next target beyond that. The duration that it can actually link between targets is 4 seconds. So it'll just keep on linking until those 4 seconds are up. And then as soon as those 4 seconds are up, it can't link anymore and it won't go any further with those linkage. And that's basically the time it'll take to actually acknowledge which units are actually getting hit by that ability. The damage per second is 1,200 electric damage, and the effect duration is 6 seconds. Now, I wish they clarified here. They don't very much well clarify. The effect duration is from the start of the ability to the end of the ability, right? But if you read the ability, enemies are on the edge of the shockwave are stunned. Every enemy throughout the ability is stunned. So this, instead of being an effect duration at the very bottom, it should actually be called the stun duration. It stuns enemies, and you could say the entire, I guess you could say the entire effect, the entire ability lasts 6 seconds, but effectively the entire stun duration is 6 seconds flat. Now, the very interesting, and the only thing that's actually interesting to note here, is that if you have enemies and you do this at a very low level, you'll notice that one enemy actually survives it for quite a bit of time. They'll just sit there and they'll survive it, and they'll just be sitting there and you're waiting, and then they'll finally die. Why is that? It's because it has a 4.5 second damage delay, which is interesting because at higher levels, you'll notice that one unit that survives the ability actually doesn't die. Why? Is because when you press the ability, from the beginning of the ability till the end of the ability, it makes sure that one unit doesn't die. It's very interesting, but it makes sure that one unit doesn't die, and as long as the enemies around that unit die before it, 4.5 seconds before it, that unit will die. If there's less time, where there's 3 seconds between them dying and the end of the ability, he'll survive, which is pretty interesting. So if the units die, let's say at 5 seconds before that unit will then receive the final discharge damage, basically killing it. If there's only 3 seconds or, 4 seconds up until that 4.5 point, exactly at 4.5 point is the break point. If it's 4 seconds, that unit will not be dealt that damage and it will survive. If it's 3 seconds, not be dealt that damage and it'll survive, all the way down to 1 and 0. But if there's more time where the units around it died within 5 seconds and 5 seconds until the end of the ability, that final unit will actually die because there's more than 5 seconds. I don't know why this is, but the end effect is that at higher levels, all the units will die in the area. And if there is enough health on those units, which most likely there is, that one last unit will always survive. Pretty much it just makes sure that one unit out of the lot survives. I don't know why this is for this ability. It's such a weird, unique effect, but it really doesn't make any sense because the ability should just do what it's supposed to do and just kill people, not make sure that at higher levels at least one unit survives. So super confused on this one, why that effect is, why it's not written down, or why it even exists at all. But it's super interesting. And with the passive, I forgot to mention this, but the passive, as soon as you have that 1,000 damage, it'll apply to shock, discharge as well. So if you do have 1,000 damage and you do shock or you do your discharge, it'll supercharge those abilities and deal that extra 1,000 damage throughout both of those abilities. So super interesting, super useful kit. Should we take a look at the mods?
Yes.
Alrighty. So first thing I actually wanted to do is I wanted to go over 3 builds. I do use a test build. I go through and I just kind of do some speed changes. I just kind of look at, okay, what would my speed be if I increased my speed, and just kind of find like a nice speed to go at. That's how I tested out. Okay, 2 speed is pretty manageable. 3 speed, you start kind of bumping into walls and you don't really have as much control. So I do have a Tridolon build. This build is more so for dealing with Eidolons and being able to kill Eidolons, especially for the electric shield. This makes sure that you just can straight up kill Eidolons, dealing double damage with your electric shield. And then, of course, with speed, making sure that you have a faster reload speed as well. For my overall speed build, this is just to buff your teammates, making sure that you can be able to hit everyone within your area. And that's pretty much it. You really don't use electric shield all that much. It's just more for a speed running build. First, I want to take a look at the augments because I found the augments to be very interesting. So you have shocking speed. It's a speed augment. While moving under the effects of speed, enemies within 3 meters take 300 electrical damage with guaranteed status effect. This is very useful, especially if you're speed running missions and you just won't want to get shot while you're moving through a whole bunch of units. If you don't want to get shot, this shocks people, and by shocking them, it stuns them. So they just can't move, they can't fire, they can't do anything. So while you're passing through with a whole bunch of your teammates make it through safely without getting downed or having a mission failed. Transistor shield is an electric shield augment. Allies can pick up electric shield, so that's pretty useful. Is, hey, I need to be able to move around or I need to mobilize my shields. Now your allies can pick up your shields and move them around with them, basically carrying that damage with them from that 2 times damage multiplier. The 300% of the damage absorbed will be added into Volt's static discharge. This is very useful for this passive ability. Instead of having to travel 100 meters to get all of your damage, to get that 1,000 damage bonused into your next attack or into your shock or into your discharge, that basically means for this transistor shield that at higher levels you'll just instantly get that 1,000 damage and not have to traverse 1,000 or 100 meters to be able to get all that damage bonus, and you're basically able to just keep on using your discharge every single second pretty much because of the damage incoming. So this is a really useful augment. Capitance. Discharge augment converts 3% of the damage dealt into shields between Volt and squad mates. So this is for your discharge. This is pretty useful just to get over shields over all of your allies. It's not as useful, I'd have to say, as mag or even maybe even Equinox. I think though it's definitely quicker than Equinox, but I don't think it's as good as Mag, because just really just to have an augment just to get over shields, it's just not as good. Especially with Mag, you don't even need to have an augment to be able to get over shields, so not as useful. Shock Trooper, it's a Shock Trooper augment. Hold to cast will grant all allies within 15 meters an additional 100% electricity damage to your attacks for 40 seconds. Now, there's a pretty big difference between this and Electric Shield. Electric Shield, if you remember, adds 30% electrical damage to your attacks. Basically the same thing. This doubles your damage though. Instead of having 50%, this adds 100%. But the main difference here is this is an additive status effect onto your melee weapons. This is additive, but it adds it on top of another status effect. So if you have some weapon that deals heat, this will deal now, instead of heat, it'll deal radiation. With Electric Shield, instead of just dealing heat, it'll deal heat and electrical. So this just adds on an additional status effect. This basically multiplies, or basically combines those two elements to make another element, instead of just adding on an additional element onto your weapon. This is more useless than it actually seems. If you have a weapon with heat damage, sure, yeah, you can make radiation. That's great. That's useful. But especially for even the Eidolon, I'm going to actually be using Smite, because Smite just gives you better damage, and then you don't have to try to actually mix and or combine the elements. This straight up just gives you radiation, and quite a bit of radiation. There's no real difference between the two. So even for this augment here, you might as well just throw it out the window, especially with Electric Shield adding that extra status for condition overload. This is pretty good, because instead of not having it, now you have electrical, and now you're dealing an extra 80% damage based upon condition overload. So that's really, really useful. Shock Trooper just isn't as useful. It just kind of kicks the bucket. Recharge Barrier. Electric Shield augment allies that pass through the shield have a 35% shields restored. This is pretty useful, but I believe there is a timer to get your shields back. So there is a 15-second timer that by the time you can actually spam it. So it's just not as useful as other augment mods. The main ones I like is Shocking Speed and Resistor Shield, because you get that extra 1,000 damage right away after you take some damage through the shield. Not that you actually take the damage, but the shield takes the damage, and then you get the multiplied damage. And Shocking Speed, because Shocking Speed, again, you're moving through a mission and make sure that people just can't fire on you. All right, so we're going to take a look at Tri-Eidolon first. This is our Eidolon killing build. We are going to be using Arcane Nullifier. This makes sure that we can just keep on casting speed and Electric Shield without just draining a whole bunch of energy. We have Arcane Energize on here, just make sure we have our energy back. We have Deadeye. Rubico is very useful. We are going to be using Deadeye just to punch a whole bunch more damage into targets, and Prime Sure-Footed to make sure we just don't get knocked down, so we can always stay up and keep on firing at those Eidolons. For the main build, we're going to be mostly focusing on to Electric Shield, and since we can't really do anything with Power Strength to buff Electric Shield, because the damage multiplier from critical damage can't actually be additive on with Power Strength, all we really need to be doing is just making a survival-based build just to survive the Eidolon, and making sure that we just don't go down a whole bunch, because the more time down means that we can't spend more time firing onto the Eidolon. So really no real abilities to be focusing on here. It's mainly just a survival build just to keep Volt out on the table at all times without him going down repetitively. So we have Narrow-Minded for as much ability duration as we can. If we have squad mates, we want to be sticking nice and tight together like glue with them, making sure that we can just pop on speed. And for Electric Shield, we really don't need a whole bunch of range anyway, because the ranges on the shield aren't even affected by range here. So just sticking like glue to our allies, making sure that our ability duration lasts a very long time so that we can keep up our speed and that our speed just doesn't diminish over time. It's nice to have that speed for reloads and also for fire rate. We have a maximized battery here, so we just don't run out of energy. Primed contingency for more ability duration, making sure that speed doesn't go down. Blind rage, it isn't very useful here, to be honest. It does add more of a speed multiplier, but this does negate your ability efficiency. So I really actually wouldn't go with that one, because if you're doing eidolons, it doesn't matter about power strength all that much. Instead, I might actually add on transient fortitude just to be more efficient. That just makes sure that, you know, you lose a little bit of duration, but yeah, really not too much difference. I really wouldn't put a whole bunch of effect onto speed. Speed doesn't really do too much more, too much less. It does add a lot more, but like there aren't really a lot of other mods to use on this. You could also add on the lightning rod. This would make sure, especially from the eidolon, that you're not taking as much damage from electrical damage, but we still want to be able to buff our allies. So I think going the transient fortitude would probably be a better move here rather than going negative efficiency. We have negative 55% ability efficiency here, which pretty heavily affects your spam ability that you can do electric shield and speed. And I would rather go transient fortitude, even if it negates a little bit of your speed multiplier or your reload speed. It just makes sure that you keep your abilities out there on the table without draining a whole bunch of energy. Here we have another 13 energy used for speed, which pretty much adds 50% more 50% more energy used, versus if we negate some duration, we only lose 3 seconds on duration. So not a huge difference there. But again, it's negotiable. You could go for more speed, you could go for less speed. It's just all about what you really want at that point. There's no real big differences there. We go Umbral Vitality and Umbral Intensify. This just makes sure that you're tankier, adds a whole bunch of health onto you, so you just don't go down by toxin damage, which eidolons don't really have a lot of toxin damage. So you could almost even at that point go Umbral Fiber just to make sure that you're just a little bit more tanky, but we really don't need to go that far because we're going to be negating even more ability strength here. So not too much there, just really, it's really negotiable. Just how much speed you want. If you want less speed, you can go Umbral Fiber here, add you more tanky. Transient Fortitude gets you more power strength, but you lose the tanky. And if you really want more speed, then you could go Blind Rage and go super fast. But it's all negotiable. Again, the only thing that isn't negotiable, though, is Smite Infusion. So this is a Smite Augment. Hold to cast within and grant allies within 15 meters an additional 100% radiation damage for their attacks. Now, this is based upon ability strength. This actually adds quite a bit of extra radiation damage. You can also have a Trinity that has this during the Eidolon, and if you add on Blind Rage, this does add quite a bit more extra radiation damage. From Transient Fortitude, you're losing a good 50%, something like that. It's not, again, it's kind of negotiable, but again, like this does do more damage, but then you are going less efficiency. But if you do go Transient Fortitude, then you're going to be losing some of that duration. So sometimes it actually, for me, might actually be using Blind Rage more than less. Again, it's negotiable, whatever you're going for. But Smite Infusion does add quite a bit of damage, and especially for adding a huge amount of damage for the Eidolon, it just makes sure that the Eidolon goes down quicker rather than taking a longer amount of time on it. We actually, instead of, again, like the Lightning Rod, instead of Lightning Rod, we actually use Rapid Resilience. This actually effectively takes out 75% of electrical damage, especially with the final Eidolon. He does a lot of electrical damage. This takes out the majority of it. Lightning Rod just doesn't take out as much. Again, you could add this on instead of something like Blind Rage, just to make sure that you're always having as much duration on the ability, and also your most efficient on the ability, making sure that the ability is always out on the table. But if you really want to make sure that you survive those lightning strikes, you could also put on lightning rod just to make sure that you just don't go down super, super easy. But rapid resilience does most of the major effect on that lightning damage, just making sure that you don't go down. So this is probably the best mod for Eidolons, just making sure that Volt doesn't go down because of his low resistances. Prime Sure-Footed for increased chance to knockdown. Again, with Trinity's video, go ahead and watch that. This makes sure that you just don't get knocked down. It's always nice staying on your feet.
Love this mod.
Oh yeah, love the mod. So testing, again, this is just my build for just testing. I just go through, test out different speeds. I play around with this build quite a bit, so nothing really to worry about there. This is my team co-op build just for speed runs and just making sure that you can get through the mission. Steel Charge for increased damage, Prime Sure-Footed for resist for knockdown. I use Transistor Shield and Shocking Speed. Transistor Shield, now that I'm thinking a little bit more about it, could actually be good for Triathlon, but again, it only adds electrical damage, so take it as you will. Really, the Eidolon has to fire on you first. It is a good defense, but at the same time, a lot of the time it just gets annoying trying to pick up the shields, trying to move them around, but it could be definitely useful for that. I also use Shocking Speed for just making sure you can get out of the mission. Umbral Intensify and Umbral Vitality for more health and for more ability strength, just for speed, just to give it a little bit so that it actually can move pretty quickly. Primed Flow for more energy maximum battery. For more duration, add Primed Continuancy, just to make sure that your duration is pretty sucky on this, making sure that you can just keep it out on the table for a longer period of time. Stretch for making sure all allies get it. You have a pretty good radius on this, 25 meters. It just adds a little bit more range. I wouldn't go overextended unless you really want to make sure that it goes onto your allies. You could also do that as well. And then redirection, or even if you wanted to overextend it instead of stretch, and transient fortitude to make sure that you have enough speed. And if you want to, you could go insane speed, but that really isn't necessary. The main thing that I would use Volt for are both of these two abilities, the electric shield for the increased critical damage, and of course speed, because speed is just a very good speed running tactic. But yes, that's pretty much it. I really haven't used any Archon shards on him at all. He's just more conditional for Eidolon hunting. If you were going to put on some Archon shards, I would absolutely recommend some reds for more ability duration. Making sure that you have 75% more ability duration makes it so that you can just keep your abilities out there on the table more, especially if you want something to continually farm the Eidolons. I would highly recommend going ability duration, just because then your speed lasts longer, your shields last longer, and overall you're using less energy over time, keeping your abilities out on the table. But yes, shall we go ahead and use this?
We shall.
All right.
And for me, I'm fine with a 2.72 times multiplier.
Yeah.
Because further than that, it's like too fast for me, and I can only handle Volt.
Yeah. So
much.
Around actually 2 speed as well is, if you think about bullet jumping is 12 meters every time you bullet jump. And your base movement speed, just walking around, is 6 meters every second.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're increasing your speed by 2 times, that's 12 meters every second. So you're moving the same speed as bullet speed, or a bullet jump. So you really do not need to go above 2. And even now, it's just kind of, for me, a little bit too much for your speed.
Yeah. I mean, I can handle it. It's not that bad for me.
Yeah. But like this is more manageable. I like the 2 times speed. Did you put yours back on? Or?
I put mine back on.
Oh.
Yeah.
I just want to see my speed and then your speed.
Okay. Well, you can backflip to get rid of that.
I think it already fell off though. Did you get mine? My speed?
No.
Oh. Because you can just kind of show the difference between one speed and the other if you just let the duration effect.
Alright, give me your spade.
Spade.
Spade!
So especially at 2, I find is a pretty good number because then you're just not crashing into walls. You have better control over it. You have more reaction time. Is it too slow for you?
It's too slow for me.
Yeah, so different people, different tastes. Some people like it fast. Some people don't like it fast and don't like it crashing into walls. So it just depends on you how fast you really want it. So that's why a lot of those mods are just optimal just for different speeds. For me, I just don't like a whole bunch of speed. Let's see what your speed's like.
Well, I just got your speed.
Is that your speed?
Yeah.
Well, that's not bad, but still. It can be a little bit too fast for some people.
Well, it gets to a point whenever you're doing like void fissures and getting void reactant and stuff, and they give you the ability strength and range one. It gets a bit too fast for me, and I'm like, oh, I can't control myself.
Yeah. So there is a good reason why not to be going power strength. You really don't need it. I would rather go ability duration, because Narrow Minded takes out your range.
Yeah. And I also have my Rock to Dark dagger on for that overshield.
Oh, yeah.
Which is nice. If you're not doing the augment for his discharge.
My voice has been like a little bit raspy. Like, yeah.
Well, my voice is, my throat's been hurting all morning.
Oh.
Ever since we got up, and I'm like, oh, I hope I'm not coming down with something again.
Shocking. Oh, also with discharge, I believe the damage does actually fall off. Like radial damage from a grenade or anything like that.
Uh-huh.
I believe it does actually fall off.
Ooh.
So that is something also with the ability that I just kind of find silly. It does make sense though, because over range you should probably have some electrical fall off.
Yeah.
Whee. Well, the speed is nice.
Very shocking indeed. Oh, speed for you. It's probably a little too fast, but I like the speed.
All right.
Oh, I was going the right way.
Shall we go?
Yeah. I'm here.
All right. Yes. So that is Volt. As you can tell, Volt is more so for Eidolon hunting, and of course, even with projectiles, just having the shield down to add that 2 times critical multiplier. Another thing you can take into account is also the Ordana. The Ordana or the Ordana Prime both have the same ability. It's the Ordnance ability. It basically also does the same thing. It just does a 2 times critical multiplier as well. But instead of the electric damage, it also does heat damage instead of the electric. So that is something that's kind of interesting. But again, like Volt, I really only use him when it's really Eidolon farming time. And other than that, yeah, I don't even use him.
Or if we're speed running through the void relics to get more traces. But other than that, we used him.
Yeah, but like even then you could almost use Titania at that point.
Yeah.
So really we only use him for the shield, and that after that pretty much all the other abilities just fall off going into later game, and especially later game it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like again, Chroma can get a 10 times to a 14 times damage multiplier. And even when you're talking about speed, even if your speed increases instead of 2 at 3, you're only looking at maybe 33% increased damage to maybe 50% increased damage, depending on the attack speed of the weapon. But it just isn't very good. Chroma would be much better because he just gives you a flat damage increase of, again, 10, 14 times in Volt, only adding, 100% increased attack speed or something a little bit higher. Yeah, it might add, maybe 1 times damage, but still, again, that's 50% if you're over 2 seconds. So even to the point of Volt, yeah, he doesn't add a huge amount of damage buff. He doesn't add, the only thing that I can think of that he adds is really the shield. And again, I don't know what's with the discharge, just leaving that one unit alive. I really don't understand that. Maybe that's just something that was a unique effect that someone thought should be added in. And that's fine. I do see that as being, a unique effect. It leaves one person alive, but usually you would want the ability to kill somebody. And for the passive, especially with the augment, the transistor shield augment, this takes too long to build up. Having to traverse 3 rooms to finally build up this passive is a little bit more than ridiculous. This takes such a long time, and especially if you want to be able to use the damage off of that, it should be a lot earlier. And again, with that transistor shield, it immediately gives you that damage bonus. As soon as something high level shoots the shield, you immediately get that 1000 damage off. And especially on the base passive, it takes such a long time to build that up. I feel like it should be much faster. You should be able to utilize that added extra damage to be able to put it into either your first ability or your fourth, just to supercharge both of those abilities and to deal even more damage. But it takes so long to be able to get there. I get why they added in the augment to be able to use the passive ability. That does add quite a bit more damage. But again, I just feel like it really does fall off later game because there's other frames that just do much, much better. But yes. Well, is that all the time we have for this episode?
Unfortunately.
Yes. And we will see you guys in the very next video. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.